"He has a weapon! I'm telling you, Sheriff! He's dangerous! You have to do something before he hurts someone!" The voice was a shrill instrument of manufactured terror, cutting through the peaceful mountain air. It belonged to a woman named Brenda Hatcher, and she was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her face, which I had come to associate with petty tyranny, was now a perfect mask of frantic fear. Her hand was clutched dramatically to her chest as she pointed a trembling finger at me, a silent command for the lawmen present to see me not as a man, but as a threat. Her audience consisted of 2 sheriff's deputies and me. I stood perfectly still, my hands held loosely at my sides, away from my body as I'd been taught in hostile environment training decades ago. Keep them visible. Keep them non-threatening. My expensive surveying theodolite, a complex instrument of brass and glass, stood on its heavy tripod a few feet away, a silent metallic testament to the truth. That was the weapon she was screaming about. My instrument of precision had become her instrument of slander. The younger of the 2 deputies had his face beaded with sweat despite the cool air. His hand hovered over the grip of his sidearm, his knuckles white. His eyes darted between me, the hysterical woman, and the shiny piece of equipment he didn't recognize. He was nervous, uncertain, and that made him the most dangerous person here. In my experience, it's never the professionals you have to worry about, it's the amateurs trying to act like them. "Sir," the sheriff said, his voice low and cautious. He was an older man, weathered by years of dealing with the strange and unpredictable disputes that bubble up in isolated communities. His eyes held a weary professionalism, but also a tension that told me he was taking the threat seriously. "I need you to step away from the device and keep your hands where I can see them." I complied without a word, taking 2 slow, deliberate steps back, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. I didn't feel fear, not anymore. The last 6 months watching my wife Laura fade away had hollowed that emotion out of me. Fear was a luxury for people who still had everything to lose. What I felt instead was a profound, bone-deep tiredness, and beneath it a cold, dormant anger beginning to stir. I had come to this place, this last sanctuary of memory, to escape this exact kind of confrontation. I had come here to be invisible. "He's trying to steal our land," Brenda continued, her voice rising to a shrill peak, sensing she had the authorities' attention. "He's not even a member of the association. He's some corporate surveyor trying to intimidate us, marking off our private property. He threatened me when I confronted him." My gaze drifted past her, past the sheriff's grim face, and landed on the sign they had hammered into the ground earlier that day. The sign that had finally woken me from my grief-induced slumber. It read, "Private HOA property." The sign was a lie, and it was planted squarely on state park land. My land, in a manner of speaking, my responsibility, my jurisdiction, and that was the fact that hovered between us. A truth she was blissfully, dangerously unaware of. My mind, trained by years of risk assessment, began to analyze the scene. 2 deputies, 1 jumpy, 1 seasoned. 1 accuser, highly emotional and demonstrably unreliable. 1 accused, me, calm and compliant. The variables were all there. The key was the sheriff. He was the fulcrum on which this situation would pivot. My job was not to prove my innocence to the hysterical woman, but to give the professional man a reason to doubt her narrative. The sheriff took a cautious step forward, his gaze sweeping over my calm demeanor, which so clearly contradicted the panic-stricken report he'd received. His eyes took in my worn flannel shirt, my work jeans, my dusty boots. I didn't look like a corporate surveyor. I looked like what I was pretending to be, a retiree working on his property. Then he looked at my equipment, gleaming and complex, which didn't fit the retiree image at all. The contradiction was where the questions began. I could see them forming in his eyes. He looked back at me, his expression hard and demanding. "All right, sir." I've heard her side. Now I need to hear yours. "I'm Sheriff Miller. Let's start from the beginning. Who are you, and what the hell is going on here?" I met his gaze. and for the first time since he'd arrived, I prepared to speak at length. This was my opening. This was where the story would either end with me in handcuffs or with Brenda Hatcher's world beginning to unravel. I thought of Laura and the promise I'd made to keep this place peaceful. I had failed, but maybe, just maybe, I could still protect it. I met Sheriff Miller's hard gaze, the flashing red and blue lights painting fleeting streaks across his weathered face. To answer his question, to explain how a man seeking only solitude could end up at the center of a police standoff, I couldn't just give him a name. I had to give him the story. A story that started not with a weapon, but with a memory. It had begun 3 weeks prior, on the day I first arrived at this cabin, hoping its silence could drown out the silence Laura had left behind. The cabin was our sanctuary. Her grandfather had built it, and she had spent her happiest childhood summers here. It was where she brought me on our 3rd date, where I asked her to marry me. After 6 months of navigating the hollow, echoing rooms of our life in the capital, this was the only place on earth her ghost felt like a warm presence instead of a cold absence. I came here to heal. For 2 days, that healing began. I unpacked little, worked with my hands, and let the quiet of the lake seep into my bones. On the 3rd morning, I decided to do something simple: clear a thicket of overgrown brush at the edge of my driveway. The rhythmic work was meditative until a sharp voice cut through the peace. "What do you think you're doing?" It was Brenda Hatcher, the self-appointed queen of Lakeview Estates. I calmly explained that I was on my own property. She, in turn, informed me that I was violating the rules of her HOA by modifying a common area greenbelt. I corrected her, stating the simple fact that her greenbelt was in fact state park land. My calm, factual rebuttal was a spark thrown on gasoline. She was infuriated by my refusal to be intimidated. After threatening to document the violation, she stormed off. I stood there, watching her retreat, a profound weariness settling over me. I had come here to escape power plays, only to find a petty tyrant in the woods. But I made a decision. I would not fight her. I had no energy for it. But I would not run either. This place was too important. I would simply endure. My strategy of passive resistance was tested the very next morning. A crisp, cream-colored envelope was taped to my front door. Violation notice. Improper clearing of common area greenbelt. Fine. $250. I read it, shook my head at the absurdity, and used it as kindling for the evening fire. This became a ritual. 2 days later, a notice for non-conforming vehicle model, $150, joined its predecessor in the flames. A notice for excessive smoke from chimney, $100, followed. I was treating her authority like the meaningless paper it was printed on, and I knew that for a woman like Brenda, being ignored was worse than being fought. She escalated. A week after my arrival, a list appeared on the community bulletin board near the mailboxes. Properties under review for non-compliance. My address, 7 Hemlock Lane, was at the top. The shunning began immediately. Neighbors who had previously offered a friendly wave now found the ground intensely interesting when I walked past. The message was clear. I was an outsider, a problem to be avoided. Brenda was poisoning the well, isolating me. When the paper threats and public shaming failed to produce the desired result, she sent in her cavalry. A white work van belonging to Hatcher Construction pulled into my driveway one afternoon. A man with a too-friendly smile and the same last name as Brenda introduced himself as her cousin, Vince. "Brenda sent me over," he said, all swagger and false sincerity. "HOA requires a mandatory structural integrity inspection on all lakeside docks every 5 years. Just a formality." I watched in silence as he performed his 15-minute theater of an inspection on my rock-solid dock. He kicked at pylons that had stood for 50 years. He shook railings that had weathered hurricanes. He sighed dramatically and scribbled on a clipboard. "Afraid I've got some bad news," he announced, his face a mask of grave concern. "You've got significant subsurface rot. A major safety hazard. He handed me a glossy business card and a quote for a full replacement that was nothing short of extortion. I looked at the quote, then at his shifting, dishonest eyes. I knew a scam when I saw one. I had spent a career exposing them on a much grander scale. "I'll take it under advisement," I said, my voice flat. I gave him nothing. No anger, no fear, no argument, just dismissal. It clearly unnerved him. He stammered a goodbye and left in a hurry. That night, his fraudulent quote burned especially bright. In her car, parked on a ridge overlooking the lake, Brenda Hatcher tapped her fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. Vince slumped into the passenger seat, frustrated. "He's not biting, Bren," he grumbled. "He didn't even flinch at the rot story. Just stared at me with those dead eyes. It's creepy. He's not scared." Brenda's perfectly manicured hands tightened on the wheel. "He's arrogant. He's one of those sovereign citizen types. Thinks the rules don't apply to him. He's a problem that needs a permanent solution." She pointed through the windshield, down toward the strip of trees and shoreline that separated Arthur's cabin from the main body of the lake. "We need him gone. The investors for the marina project are getting nervous. Once he's out, we file the new plat map with the county. That sliver of state land becomes our new waterfront access. The state will never even notice it's gone. We just need him to break or to leave." "And if he doesn't?" Vince asked. Brenda's smile was thin and sharp. "Oh, he will," she said. "Everyone breaks eventually." I did my best to ignore them. I tried to retreat back into the quiet world of my grief, to find solace in the familiar woods and water. I walked the paths Laura had walked, my hands sometimes reaching out as if to take hers. The harassment was a constant, low-grade hum of irritation, a distraction from the more profound pain I was trying to process. But I was enduring. I was holding my ground. The final provocation, the one that finally broke through my wall of passive resistance, came on a Tuesday morning. I woke early and walked onto the porch with my first cup of coffee. That's when I saw them. Vince Hatcher's work crew was back, but they weren't near my dock. They were on the path leading down to the water's edge, the path that I knew with the unshakable certainty of the man whose office held the master maps for the entire state, was public land. They were hammering large, official-looking signs into the earth. The signs were a deep, authoritative green with crisp white lettering. Private property, future home of the Lakeview Estates Yacht Club, members only, no trespassing. I stood there, coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips, and felt something inside me snap. The thick, numbing fog of grief didn't just burn away, it ignited. They had sent letters, they had tried intimidation, they had attempted fraud. I had absorbed it all. But this was a physical act of theft. They were stealing land that belonged to the people of this state. And worse, they had planted their flag of greed right on top of a memory. They had put a "no trespassing" sign on the path where Laura and I had walked 1,000 times, on the ground that was sacred to me, not because I owned it, but because she had loved it. In that moment, standing on the porch of the quiet cabin, the grieving husband, Art, with his strategy of endurance, finally receded, and the state land commissioner, Arthur Evans, a man with a duty to protect every inch of public land, woke up. And he was furious. The anger that rose in me was nothing like Brenda Hatcher's hot, sputtering rage. It was cold. It was quiet. It was the focused, calculated fury of a man who had just watched someone deface a cathedral. For weeks I had allowed this woman's petty grievances to be the dominant force in my life here. I had treated her as a nuisance, an unfortunate part of the landscape to be weathered like a bad storm. I had been wrong. This wasn't a nuisance. This was a crime, and it was happening on my watch. I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing, the ceramic making a sharp, definitive click in the morning air. The time for passive endurance was over. The time for grief to be my only guide was over. Laura would not have wanted me to let this stand. She loved this land for its wildness, for its openness to everyone. Brenda Hatcher was trying to put a cage around it, and in doing so, she had awoken something in me I thought had died with my wife. My sense of duty. I didn't storm over to her signs and tear them down. That would be playing her game, a game of emotional, theatrical gestures. My response had to be rooted in something she couldn't argue with, something she couldn't fine or legislate away. It had to be rooted in the truth. I walked to my truck, my steps now filled with a purpose that felt both foreign and familiar. I bypassed the cab and went to the large black toolbox bolted to the truck bed. I unlocked it, the metallic snap echoing in the quiet. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was the other side of my life, the tools not of a grieving husband, but of the state land commissioner. I lifted out the heavy carbon fiber tripod first. Then came the hard case containing the Leica TS-16, a digital surveying theodolite so precise it could measure the angle between two stars. Finally, I grabbed my ruggedized field tablet and a bundle of survey stakes, some bright, almost fluorescent orange, and a smaller bundle of a specific sky blue color, used exclusively by the State Parks Department for marking public land boundaries. I carried the equipment to the edge of my property, right where Brenda's new signs stood as arrogant sentinels. I didn't even glance at them. They were irrelevant, a fiction. I was here to establish the facts. I set up the tripod with the practiced, deliberate motions of a man who had done this 1,000 times. I mounted the theodolite, leveled it, and powered it on. Its small screen glowed to life, connecting to the network of GPS satellites orbiting high above. On my tablet, I pulled up the official state plat maps, the same ones stored in the secure servers back at the Capitol. They were overlaid with satellite imagery, showing the precise, legally recognized boundary lines for every parcel in this county. My parcel, the HOA's common areas, and the protected state parkland that Brenda Hatcher was now trying to claim as her own. For the next 2 hours, I worked in complete silence. I was a surgeon, dissecting a landscape with beams of light and mathematical certainty. I took sightings, cross-referenced GPS coordinates, and calculated angles with digital precision. Then I would walk to a specific spot and drive a stake firmly into the ground, an orange stake for the exact corners of my own private property, creating an undeniable, legally accurate perimeter. Then a blue stake, hammered into the earth exactly on the boundary line of the public state parkland. I placed one right next to Brenda's first private property sign, the contrast almost comical. Her sign was a loud, boastful lie. My stake was a quiet, immovable truth. I continued down the line, creating a clear, physical, and legally unimpeachable border. Each tap of my hammer was a quiet declaration. This is where your authority ends. This is where the law begins. This is not yours. I was fully aware that I was being watched. I could feel her eyes on me. Through the trees I caught the flicker of sunlight off the binoculars she was using from her front window. I could imagine her state of mind shifting, her initial annoyance turning to confusion, and her confusion curdling into raw panic. A man she had dismissed as a stubborn retiree was now using thousands of dollars of professional equipment to methodically prove she was a common thief. Her entire land grab scheme, the linchpin of her deal with the marina investors, was being exposed, stake by brightly colored stake. She must have realized that I wasn't just some amateur with a grudge. No ordinary person had access to this level of equipment or data. The calm, methodical way I worked must have been terrifying to her. It wasn't the act of a man arguing, it was the act of a man building a case. I continued my work, ignoring her, citing another point. My focus was absolute. That's when I heard a door slam across the street. I didn't look up, but I heard the sound of her shrill, enraged voice carrying on the wind. She was on the phone, and I knew, with a grim sense of inevitability, that she was making her final, desperate move. When your lies are exposed and your authority is revealed to be a sham, there is only one option left for a tyrant. You invent a new, more dangerous lie. You call in the police and claim to be the victim. 10 minutes later, I heard the sirens. They came in fast, 2 sheriff's cruisers kicking up gravel as they skidded to a stop, boxing in my truck. The wail of the sirens died, leaving an even more terrifying silence in its wake. Doors flew open. Deputies took cover, and a man with a sheriff's star on his chest stepped out, his hand resting on his sidearm. That was when Brenda Hatcher began her performance. She ran towards Sheriff Miller, a frantic, disheveled mess, her voice filled with fabricated terror. I heard snippets of it as she pointed at me, threatening me, a weapon, trying to steal our land. And that's how I ended up here, standing in the middle of a sun-drenched clearing, my hands in the air, surrounded by men with guns, all because I had dared to plant a few stakes in the ground to mark the truth. The long, quiet battle of attrition was over. The loud, dangerous war had just begun. All that was left was the sheriff's question, hanging in the air like a loaded gun. "Who are you, and what the hell is going on here?" The sheriff's question hung in the air, heavy and demanding. "Who are you, and what the hell is going on here?" His hand was a breath away from his sidearm. His deputies were tense, ready to escalate. Brenda Hatcher stood nearby, a smug, triumphant look starting to replace her feigned terror. She believed she had won. She believed her authority, backed by the force of local law enforcement, was absolute. She was wrong. I let the silence stretch for a beat, a tactic I'd learned long ago in hostile negotiations. First, you de-escalate the immediate physical threat. I gave a slow, deliberate nod toward my truck. "Sheriff," I said, my voice calm and even, a stark contrast to Brenda's frantic shrieks. "My name is Arthur Evans. My hands are in the air. I am unarmed. The object Miss Hatcher mistook for a weapon is a carrying case for a surveyor's tripod. It contains only scientific instruments. You and your deputies are welcome to inspect it. My truck and my person. You will find nothing that poses a threat to anyone." Brenda, sensing a crack in the sheriff's certainty, rushed to fill it with more lies. "He's a liar!" she screeched, pointing at me. "He's a corporate surveyor! Look at his equipment! He's trying to steal our beach access for some big developer! He's a criminal!" Sheriff Miller's gaze remained locked on me. He was a veteran cop, and his instincts were telling him something was deeply wrong with the picture Brenda was painting. My composure didn't match her accusations. "I hear her, sir," he said, his voice still firm. "Now I need to hear you. What is all this?" He gestured to my neat lines of brightly colored stakes. This was the moment. I could have pulled out my state-issued ID from my wallet and ended it quickly. But that wasn't my style. A title is a blunt instrument. Understanding is a scalpel. I needed him to understand the full scope of what was happening here, not just react to a job title. I let my hands lower slowly, a gesture of quiet confidence. I took a step forward, not in aggression, but as if I were about to explain a complex map. "Sheriff Miller," I began, my tone shifting from that of a suspect to that of an expert providing a briefing. "Before we discuss who I am, let's talk about where we are. We are currently standing on 3 distinct types of land." I pointed to the orange stakes. "That line marks the legal boundary of my private property. Parcel 4 according to the official county plat maps. I was well within my rights to clear brush there." I then pointed to the blue stakes, the ones that stood defiantly next to Brenda's signs. "This blue line marks the official boundary of Hemlock Lake State Park, as established by the 1954 State Land Act and confirmed by subsequent surveys in 1972 and 1998. Everything on that side of the blue stakes is protected public land. It belongs to the people of this state." I paused, letting the weight of that information sink in. I saw the younger deputy exchange a confused glance with his partner. "Therefore," I continued, my voice level and clear, "Ms. Hatcher's signs are illegally placed on protected public property. That is a misdemeanor under State Code 30-117. Furthermore, her attempt to use her position as an HOA officer to claim this public land for private use likely for financial gain through her proposed yacht club, constitutes a fraudulent use of her organization. My gaze flickered to Brenda, whose face was beginning to lose its triumphant glow, replaced by a dawning confusion. I wasn't finished. That illegal encroachment, when combined with a documented pattern of harassment against a legal property owner, and what my preliminary investigation suggests is an attempt to defraud a homeowner with a phony dock repair estimate from a known family member, Vince Hatcher. Well, Sheriff, it starts to look less like a simple HOA dispute and more like a pattern of organized criminal activity. I saw a flicker of genuine surprise in the sheriff's eyes. He was a rural cop, but he was sharp. He knew I wasn't just guessing at legal codes. He was beginning to understand that he had walked into something far more complex than a neighborly argument. I decided it was time to bring it home, to make it personal for him. I looked him directly in the eye. And I have to say I'm disappointed, Sheriff. Your department's grant proposal for that new search and rescue access road on the other side of the park, the one that requires a land use variance from the state. It's sitting on my desk back in the Capitol. It was a strong proposal, well written, but seeing you and your deputies out here, weapons drawn, defending a blatant land grab on state territory, it makes me question your department's commitment to protecting the very public assets you're asking for more funding to access. I paused, letting the final pieces connect in his mind. I watched his brain work, connecting the privileged information about the grant proposal, my intimate knowledge of state land statutes, my professional equipment, and the name I had given him. Arthur Evans. I saw the exact moment the realization struck him. It was like a physical blow. His eyes widened and the color drained from his face. The man he had at gunpoint was not just some retiree. He was State Land Commissioner Arthur Evans, the man who oversaw every acre of public land, every park, every shoreline in the state, the man who, with the stroke of a single pen, could approve or deny the very budget requests that kept rural departments like his afloat. The power dynamic in that clearing didn't just shift. It shattered, inverted, and reformed in an instant. Sheriff Miller's hand, which had been resting near his weapon, dropped to his side as if it had been burned. He stood up straight, his entire posture changing from one of authority to one of extreme, almost panicked deference. He turned to his stunned deputies. "Stand down!" he ordered, his voice suddenly tight and strained. "Both of you! Holster your weapons! Now!" He then turned to face Brenda Hatcher, and the professional caution he had shown her before was gone, replaced by a glacial cold. "Ms. Hatcher," he said, his voice dangerously low, "we need to have a very serious talk, right now, about filing a false police report, about making threats, about these signs, and about this land." Brenda stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her face a canvas of disbelief. Her carefully constructed reality had been demolished by a few quiet sentences. Her ultimate weapon, calling the authorities, had just turned on her with terrifying efficiency. She looked from the sheriff's stone-cold face to me, and for the first time I saw genuine, unadulterated fear in her eyes. She finally understood. She hadn't been fighting a stubborn old man. She had been picking a fight with the state itself. As one of the deputies began cautiously questioning a stammering, incoherent Brenda, and the other began photographing her illegal signs as official evidence, I walked back toward my truck. The immediate confrontation was over. The local law enforcement, now properly aimed, would handle the rest of it. But my work was not yet done. This was bigger than one power-mad HOA president. This was a systemic problem that she represented. I pulled out my cell phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a single name. My chief investigator, Maria. I pressed the call button. She answered on the first ring. "Maria, it's Arthur." "Commissioner." Her voice was crisp and professional. "Is everything all right? Your calendar said you were on personal leave." "Change of plans." I said, my voice calm, but carrying the full, unmistakable weight of my office. I need you to open a full state-level audit and ethics investigation into the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, effective immediately. I am authorizing full departmental resources. Bring everyone, auditors from finance, surveyors from land management, investigators from environmental compliance. I want every piece of paper they've filed, every permit they've pulled, and every dollar they've spent for the last 20 years. I'll have Sheriff Miller's preliminary report on a case of land fraud and filing a false police report sent to you within the hour. Yes, sir, she said without a moment's hesitation. I'll have the teams mobilized by morning. I hung up the phone. The local skirmish was over, but I had just mobilized an army. An army of public servants armed with subpoenas, calculators, and the full crushing weight of the law. Brenda Hatcher had started a war over a few feet of shoreline. She had no idea that I was about to bring the entire map. The morning after my phone call, the quiet siege of Lakeview Estates was replaced by a quiet invasion. It did not come with sirens or shouted commands. It came in a convoy of 7 dark sedans and 2 white state government vans, all bearing the official seal of the state. They rolled down the gravel roads with an unnerving lack of haste, parking in an orderly, pre-planned formation in front of the small community clubhouse that had once been Brenda Hatcher's throne room. Men and women in sharp business suits and crisp, state logo polo shirts emerged. They carried no weapons, only leather-bound briefcases, high-resolution cameras, portable document scanners, and survey equipment that made my own professional gear look modest. They were an army of a different sort. Auditors from the State Comptroller's Office, land management specialists from my own department, and fraud investigators from the Attorney General's office. They were polite, professional, and moved with the unstoppable momentum of a glacier. Their arrival signaled that the flimsy, make-believe authority of the HOA had been utterly superseded by the real, crushing weight of the law. They established a temporary command post in the clubhouse meeting room, with one of my top investigators, a sharp woman named Maria, directing the operation. The message to the residents was clear and immediate. The state has arrived, and a full, formal investigation is underway. The dismantling of Brenda's empire was a masterclass in bureaucratic efficiency. A team of state surveyors, using my initial blue stakes as a baseline, conducted an exhaustive, legally binding survey of the entire disputed boundary. They used ground-penetrating radar to locate the original, buried 1954 survey markers, proving beyond any doubt that Brenda's signs were not just on public land, but a full 50 feet inside the official boundary of Hemlock Lake State Park. Every measurement, every photograph, was another nail in the coffin of her fraudulent enterprise. Simultaneously, the auditors descended upon the HOA's financial records like wolves on a carcass. They didn't just look at the last year, they went back 20. It didn't take them long to find the rot. The kickback scheme with Vince Hatcher's construction company was laughably brazen. They found dozens of inflated invoices for required structural repairs, common area maintenance, and emergency landscaping. These invoices corresponded perfectly with checks signed by Brenda, which in turn were followed by consulting fee payments from Vince's company back to a private holding company, owned by Brenda herself. They were laundering money in plain sight, using the fear of fines and liens to fuel their personal slush fund. The most powerful evidence, however, came from the people themselves. Once word spread that the HOA was under state investigation and Brenda Hatcher was the target, the dam of fear that had silenced the community for years finally broke. A line formed outside the clubhouse, a line of residents clutching their own folders of evidence, eager to speak to the investigators. I sat with Maria and listened to some of their stories, my heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and cold anger. There was an elderly couple, the Garcias, who had been forced to pay Vince Hatcher $8,000 to replace a perfectly good retaining wall because Brenda had declared its color out of harmony with the neighborhood's natural earth tones. There was a young single mother who had been fined repeatedly because her son's bicycle was sometimes left in the driveway for more than the approved 2-hour window. She had worked extra shifts as a waitress to pay the fines, terrified of having a lien placed on her home. One story, from a quiet man named Sam, was particularly chilling. He had questioned the HOA's budget at a meeting 5 years ago. The next week, Brenda had informed him his property was in violation of a forgotten septic tank ordinance from the 1980s. The cost to bring it up to code, quoted by Vince Hatcher, was $15,000. Sam had to take out a second mortgage. The state environmental compliance officers investigated and found that Sam's septic system was perfectly fine. The ordinance Brenda had cited had been superseded by state law a decade earlier. It was pure malicious extortion. Each story was a thread, and together they wove a tapestry of systemic fraud, abuse, and intimidation. This wasn't just a case of a power-hungry HOA president. This was a criminal enterprise masquerading as a neighborhood association. The arrests, when they came 3 days later, were quiet and anticlimactic. 2 state investigators, accompanied by a stone-faced Sheriff Miller, walked up the pristine pathway to Brenda Hatcher's front door. She answered, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her tailored blazer was gone, replaced by a simple, drab sweater. All the fight, all the righteous fury had drained out of her. She was just a tired, defeated woman, facing the consequences of her own choices. She was informed she was under arrest for multiple felony counts, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion, and falsifying public records. She didn't resist. She simply nodded and put her hands behind her back. At the same time, another team arrested Vince Hatcher at his office, surrounded by the fraudulent invoices that had paid for his lavish lifestyle. The Hatcher dynasty of petty crime had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, final click of handcuffs. 6 months later, the air in Lakeside felt different. It was lighter, cleaner. The oppressive weight of constant surveillance and arbitrary judgment had lifted. The Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association had been officially dissolved by the State Attorney General's office. A court-appointed receiver was managing its assets, which were primarily being used for a restitution fund to repay every illegal fine collected over the past 15 years. For many families, it was a financial lifeline. A strange and beautiful transformation was taking place across the neighborhood. The forced, sterile conformity was gone, replaced by a vibrant, chaotic, and joyful explosion of individuality. Shutters were painted bright yellow. Vegetable gardens, once forbidden, were springing up on front lawns. Wind chimes tinkled from porches. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about freedom. It was the beautiful, messy, and wonderful sight of people reclaiming their homes and their lives. I had stayed at the cabin through the fall. The quiet I had sought was finally real, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was not the silence of solitude and grief, but the earned peace that comes after a worthy fight. My work, I had discovered, was not just a job. It was a part of who I was. And I had found a way to bridge the gap between my public duty and my private loss. Using my authority as commissioner and a portion of the state's conservation budget, I officially reclaimed the stolen land. The ugly, self-important signs were long gone. The path that Laura and I used to walk was widened, paved with fine gravel, and lined with simple wooden benches overlooking the water. A large, carved sign was placed at its entrance. Last week we held a small dedication ceremony. Most of the neighborhood came. I stood before them, the crisp autumn air carrying my words across the crowd. This path was a special place for my late wife, Laura, I began, my voice clear and steady. She believed that our public lands were our collective sanctuaries, places for peace, for reflection, and for memory. A recent attempt was made to steal this land, to turn a public sanctuary into a private privilege. Today, we formally reclaim it, not just as state park land, but as something more. I gestured to the sign. In her memory, and to honor the community that fought to protect it, this will now and forever be known as the Laura Evans Memorial Trail. May all who walk it find the peace that she always found here. It was a way to turn a site of greed and conflict into a place of beauty and remembrance. It was a way to ensure that Brenda Hatcher's legacy was not a yacht club, but a public path named for the woman whose memory she had inadvertently helped me to honor. My work wasn't finished. The Lakeview scandal had exposed deep systemic flaws in the state's oversight of these powerful, quasi-governmental bodies. A year after the arrests, I stood before a joint session of the state legislature at the Capitol. The room was packed with lawmakers, reporters, and citizens from across the state who had their own HOA horror stories. "For too long," I said, my voice echoing in the grand chamber, "we have allowed homeowners associations to operate as unchecked fiefdoms. We have seen firsthand in the Lakeview Estates case how this can lead to systemic fraud, the violation of property rights, and the erosion of public trust. A home should be a sanctuary, not a battleground, defined by the color of a shutter or the height of the grass." I laid before them my proposal, a comprehensive Homeowner and Public Lands Protection Act. It included mandatory state-level ethics training for all HOA board members, a simplified and binding state-run arbitration process for disputes, and clear, harsh criminal penalties for financial fraud and land encroachment. The press had already nicknamed it Laura's Law. Looking out at the faces in the committee, I no longer felt like a man divided. I was not Arthur Evans, the grieving husband, or Commissioner Evans, the public official. I was simply a man who had been reminded of what was worth fighting for. I had come to the mountain seeking to escape my life, but instead I had found its purpose. I had fought to protect my sanctuary because it held the memory of my wife, and now I would use the full weight of my office to protect the sanctuaries of thousands of others, ensuring that everyone's path to the lake, real or metaphorical, remained free, open, and safe from the tyranny of those who would try to steal it.